West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin announced that he does not plan to seek another term in office. He was facing an uphill battle for re-election already. Now, for months, top Biden advisors reportedly tried to convince Manchin to run again for a Senate seat, telling him that while his path to re-election looked tough, he did, in fact, have a path. But beyond the Senate, Americans are still waiting to see whether the centrist Democrat jumps into the presidential race, which Manchin says he has not yet ruled out. There's been speculation for months that Manchin could try to run for president or vice president as a third-party candidate. And those rumors became even stronger after Manchin headlined a July town hall event for the centrist organization No Labels in the crucial early voting state of New Hampshire. Now, there are many reasons Joe Manchin will give as to why he's choosing to travel the country to, quote, bring Americans together rather than running for his valuable Senate seat. Let's not forget, Democrats' majority is razor thin in the Senate, 51 to 49. But Occam's razor tells us the simplest answer is the one that's most likely. He just didn't see a path to victory in ruby red West Virginia. Instead, now he's embarking on a quest to, quote, mobilize the middle, end quote, of the American electorate. Those whom he says have been ignored by the two-party system. And when he meets them, he'll tell them about how he's not running for president, or that he's thinking about running for president, or that he might run for president. There are even more third-party sideshows this election cycle. Earlier this fall, you'll remember, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced that he's shifting his campaign. He's no longer going to run as a Democrat. He's running as an independent. And recent polling finds he could make a sizable dent in both Trump and Biden's support in key battleground states. Minnesota Congressman and gelato magnate Dean Phillips is challenging Biden for the Democratic nomination. But if you ask him, he's not running against Biden. He's just running for the future with a super PAC and a campaign staff to boot. The progressive activist Cornel West is staying strong with his run as an independent. Jill Stein, whom you'll remember from 2016, announced her candidacy earlier this week under the Green Party. Now, I happen to believe anyone should be able to run for whatever office they choose, as is their American right, and in some cases our responsibility. But we are living in perilous times right now. When it comes to this presidential race and this set of candidates, what you're really voting for or about is democracy. And anything that gives Donald Trump a better shot at winning the presidency might just be a vote against democracy. Joining me now is Jennifer Rubin, opinion writer at The Washington Post, host of Jen Rubin's Green Room podcast and an MSNBC political analyst, and Rick Wilson, the co-founder of the Lincoln Project and a former GOP strategist himself. Welcome to both of you. I have to say, Rick, I love candidates. I like more parties. I think, generally speaking, that's a good philosophy. This just doesn't feel like the moment for it right now.
Donald Trump and the autocratic movement that is emerging around him, and if you listen to what he says on the record every day and what his people are telling you they will do, they have a gun to the head of American democracy and this republic. If we elect Donald Trump again, we will not have the country we believe that exists today. We will not have an America with individual liberties, rights, and freedoms. We will have an autocratic system run by Donald Trump and a claque of these weirdo alt-right guys that surround him, like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and the rest. And everyone, as you correctly said, everyone else in this race, at the end of the day, that pulls a single vote away from Joe Biden, they're not just voting for Trump. They're voting to end this country as we know it.
Jen Rubin, you know, you're on our air a lot, and you're such an expert on so many things. But you actually dig really deep into this issue, right, about how to make elections more fair and how to make voting more fair. You think about this. You're sort of an advanced thinker on this front. And I would think that in general, you also support the concept of more people running and maybe another political party growing in time. Do you agree that this is, as Rick says, a mighty perilous time to be playing with fire?
Absolutely. First of all, none of these people have a rationale for running other than I want to be president or I want to have some attention. When No Labels was actually forced to put out what it thought it was running about, it was just bland platitudes. It ducked issues like abortion, which Americans care about deeply. So these are essentially vanity projects. If any of them actually wanted to advance a specific agenda, they might have some legitimate reason for running. But as Rick says, at this point, there is only one issue, and that is democracy. And granted, some of these people aren't going to qualify for the ballot because if you're not on a party ticket line, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of votes to get yourself on the ballot. So some of these people we're not going to have to worry about come November. But Jill Stein, my gosh, didn't she and Democrats and progressives learned their lesson in 2000. Al Gore would have been president if not for Jill Stein. So this is just a suicide for democracy. This is a kamikaze plunge into the abyss. And really, the people who encourage them are cynical or manipulative. The no labels people are not centrist. They're self-promoters, and the people behind them are, frankly, big, rich Republican donors who want to help Donald Trump any way they can.
Right, and yet, Stu, yet Rick, what does Manchin say? He's mobilizing the middle. There's a weird appeal to that, right? If you think you're in the middle, and a lot of Americans do and should be, and that's the sign of a healthy democracy. But he's trying to say that there's a reason that he's doing this. Jill Stein, at some point, someone's just got to figure this out, right? That there's something up with Jill Stein. RFK Jr. is a conspiracy theorist who's been denounced by everybody from his family to most mainstream Democrats. But Manchin's got this weird appeal that he's trying to make to say, you're in the middle, and I'm going to speak for you.
You know, look, Joe Manchin has done a lot of image shaping for himself over the years, and he's leveraged the fact that he was a Democrat in a very red state to become sort of a tie-breaking vote over and over again. He's held the White House hostage repeatedly. Look, there's nothing about Joe Manchin's philosophy or character in the record that shows it's about anything more than Joe Manchin. He is a guy who has consistently been considered one of the most venal and frankly, you know, on the verge of or over the line of being one of these transactional Republican figures that on paper everyone should hate. The idea that this is a guy who lives on a extraordinarily expensive yacht in Washington Harbor, holds court with lobbyists 24 hours a day, is not exactly the appealing idea that most Americans who think they're in the sensible center embrace. But I will say this, you know, he is a guy who has shown over and over again that he puts himself well before any other interest in the country. Again, he's held Joe Biden hostage repeatedly on legislative matters. And folks in Washington who know Joe Manchin, he'd be very low on the trust tier for most people who know his record, his personality, and his character.
Stand by, both of you. I'm going to take a quick break, and we got to pay some bills, but we will continue this conversation on the other side. You're watching Velshi.